Hello and welcome to yet another episode of From the Marginlands. This is episode 5 and I am Arati Kumar-Rao.
Hello, and I'm Prem Panicker. Arti, this time we're changing things around, right? It's not a headline so much as a visual you want to start with.
Yeah, we've been talking about things and this is something we've been batting around for a while. And so let me just share my screen
Mhm.
and let's talk about something that we often banter about between ourselves. I wish this was an interactive session and our viewers could actually see what we're showing on the screen and interact with us. If you're on YouTube, you will be seeing this, but if you're listening to us on a podcast, what you're seeing is a long, low country boat with a bunch of people sitting in it on a river. It's seems a vast-ish river, not very, very vast. You can see the other bank, and you see a man standing on the shore who is the boatman. I know that because I was on that boat. And beside him is a dog, and then in front of the boat is another man squatting at the edge of the river. They're all waiting for the boat to fill up, and for it to then take them downstream. This river is the Theista. And what do you think, Prem? If you saw this without the history, what would you think about this picture?
I would think it is summer maybe, because uh, judging by the way the boat is, it doesn't seem too deep at this point. Am I seeing what you are seeing, or am I seeing something else?
You're seeing it right. It is the dry season.
Mhm.
And the river is also more blue than brown, which also cues that it is
Yes,
the dry season. And yes, so the boat is sitting quite, and then you're seeing the sandbank as well. So it's
right.
not like the river is in speed. So
Yeah.
definitely the dry season. Yes. But I wouldn't fault anyone for seeing this picture and remarking that it is idyllic or that it
Mhm.
is, calm and pristine. That is a word thrown around so often
Yeah.
for such situations, especially. Um, and and I've always felt that there are these photographs that we take sometimes as photographers of pretty places or pretty scenes
Mhm.
which hold a completely different story behind it, right? Either in history of how we got there, or even in contemporary times of what that place really signifies. And that is what, whenever I look at this picture, it reminds me that, a picture does not tell the whole story. A picture is worth 1,000 words. I don't think so. I think you need the 1,000 words in many cases, especially increasingly so, to be able to tell the story. And this is the story of the Theista in Bangladesh.
Mhm.
And it is the dry season when there is barely any water. And this is a mighty river. It is the largest tributary of the Brahmaputra. And it's a river that one can walk across. A 7-year-old boy walked across the Teesta even as I watched him in Bangladesh. So
Hmm.
it has been, it's as anybody in South Asia knows that the Teesta water sharing treaty is fraught. It isn't even inked in any meaningful way, and there's a lot of back and forth going on about it. And in general, transboundary rivers and the issues of transboundary water sharing is a very, very contentious one, and especially in a place like South Asia where you have all the rivers originating in the Tibetan Plateau, which is China, and then
Mhm.
flowing through India or Nepal and Bhutan, um, and then coming through down to the lower riparian countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh. Uh,
Right.
it's crazy, right? So there's a lot of stories behind it, and I was just thinking that it's funny that yes, of course, a picture can, in some cases, be equal to 1,000 words, but more often than not that I have seen, we shouldn't really, kind of go by a picture, and a picture needs a lot more by way of investigation and an understanding of the histories before it's taken at face value. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if you remember when we talked about Peoply, when we were preparing to launch it and stuff, and we talked about what kind of journalism we wanted to do. You are a photographer, photojournalist. So was Kalyan, by the way. And I remember the discussions we had about the structure of a story. And what we said is, yeah, it needs to be highly visual. We need to take people there. We need to show them what it's like, but that the visuals can't be. So one of the first things we decided, if you remember, was there won't be just these slideshows, which are a favorite of media houses. You get clicks for every picture, and if you put together a series of good pictures, you get clicks. Uh, and I remember our discussions, and I remember pretty much all of us agreeing that our journalism needed to be a mix of the visual and the verbal, that the visual would take a person there, show them a scene, just like you showed one stretch of the Theista just now, but you needed the words to explain what it is that people are seeing, what the context is, what the larger story is, what the frame is, all of that. And so, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. You can't just throw a picture up there and say, scene from the Theista in summer, and expect people to get what is at stake in that particular
Yeah,
visual.
the funny thing is, in that picture, especially those particular people on that boat have actually all lost their houses to the river because of the upstream dams, which have uh, both on both sides. There's a dam on the Bangladesh side and a dam on the India side. So there's so many layers to that
Yeah.
story. So many layers.
Yeah. Which is why you never did use this picture anywhere, did you?
No, because Marginlands, the book itself, did not speak much to the Tista stories that were the first stories I did for People, actually.
Correct. Yeah.
And we did not, and for River Diaries as well, going even further back. And so that was 2014. I first went and parked in April in Assam, but after that in Bangladesh. So yes, northern Bangladesh. This is northern Bangladesh, and no, other than People, it wasn't shown anywhere else. No.
Right. Uh, talking about rivers, this book that both of us, as it turns out, are reading at the same time, Robert Macfarlane's new book, published in May, actually, is A River Alive? Uh, I one of the things, I want to read it again slowly, but what I did was speed read my way through it to get an overall impression. It kind of blends nature writing, it is travelogue, it's memoir, there's poetry, there's environmental activism. What did you make of the book, Mota Mota?
Ah, I haven't finished it either. I'm really relishing it, and I'm relishing Rob reading it out to me because that comes with drama, and I just love it. He is, uh, of course, innately expressive. I mean, if you meet
Hmm.
him, and I've had the amazing good fortune of having met him in his in Cambridge, and we spent a lovely time under a huge old lovely tree. Uh,
Hmm.
but and so, just to meet him is to know how animated he is about these things, and it's just lovely to find a kindred spirit. Um, and to have him read to me the book is joy, pure joy. And so I have been relishing it. I've been taking my time. I've actually been going back and having him reread things to me just because of the way he, if you notice his, well, you haven't heard him read it, but you probably picked this up from the prose, that his sentences flow like a river. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes gurgling, sometimes burbling, sometimes roiling, sometimes completely calm. And he reads it out like that as well. And I've just been enjoying it. And of course, then meeting my friend among the pages and potential new friends among the pages as well, right?
Yeah. Uh, yeah, it's interesting you said that, because one of the things that I find in the really good environmental writers or nature writers. I hate these words. They're not nature writers. They're just writers who happen to be looking into a particular aspect of our life, right? But for want of a better phrase, say nature writers, one of the things I notice is the highly evocative prose that relies a lot on local language. I was just thinking earlier today, you remember when you first wrote about the Thar Desert? This is even before Marginlands, but it's also there in Marginlands. Uh, you had Chatar Singh talking about language, the language of that landscape. He talks about how that language is dying out. Even his sons are not really, tuned into that language. And I was thinking earlier, before reading of your experiences with Chatar Singh, if I looked up at the sky and I was like, oh, okay, it's a cloudy day. Uh, since that Chatar Singh episode, now I look up at the clouds and say, ha, Titar Panki. Or, all of those local language. I think, yeah, your point about how his prose, Macfarlane's prose, mimics the flow of the river. There's that bit where he just cuts out all the full stops just to get you that sense of
Yes.
riding the rapids. I thought that was brilliant,
Yes.
absolutely
Yes, yes,
brilliant.
yes, yes. Absolutely brilliant. Was that in? I think it's in the third part, right?
Yeah,
It's in Canada, and where
Canada.
towards the end, where he just, oh, you should see how he reads it. Good
Hmm.
Lord, I maybe I could have played a bit for people. Oh, he reads that so fantastically, fantastically.
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
Hmm.
so now I need to get the audiobook as well and go through that. But I was completely, that is one portion I read 3 4 times before I could move on to the next bit. And yeah, it's the Magpie River in Quebec, the third section. Before that, he talks about Ecuador's what's it called, the Rio Los Cedros,
Cedros. Hmm.
uh, that river and the cloud forest, which gold
Yes.
mining is causing a
Yes.
problem. And you
Yes.
mentioned a friend we already have, Yuvan Naves in Chennai. I was reading the Chennai section and I didn't realize that the Ennore Creek had been completely uh, removed from maps. Uh, actually, I think Macfarlane has a phrase for it. He calls it annihilation cartography. Uh, it is kind of eye opening to me that, and Chennai is a place I go to multiple times a year. I just didn't realize that creek had been disappeared.
No, we need to make that trip that we had planned to go with Yuvan.
Yes.
So that has to happen still. And that's, I think I have a favorite part in the book, and it has to be the Yuvan part. I
Yeah.
loved that part. And the way, I mean, it's funny how for me, Rob is reading the book out, but I can hear Yuvan,
Yeah.
and it's so beautiful, and also so crazy damning also as well. So it's not all pretty, but you're right about that language bit. These people live so close to the land, and it's something that Chatar Singh told me, which comes back to mind. Ye bhasha nahi drishya ka roop hai,
Hmm.
which means that this is not language, it is a manifestation of the land. And they truly see these things as manifestations of the land. And that's why they have these evocative words for them, right? It's so visual, it's so oral, it's so sensual for them that they have these things. And um, even where Rob enumerates the Tamil words
Hmm.
for these parts of the landscape, they're just so, and there's so much more, I know, because even Yuvan has been collecting these words as well. There are so many. It's a way of life, the life that is so tied in with the land. And I'm so glad Rob did this book the way he did, because he's brought that innate, intense connection um, through the language out, and it's brilliant. That it has to be through the people who live on the land and with the land and who know it intimately. How else will it be? We are too disconnected from that.
Yeah, and that's the other commonality I found, right? I mean, it's not just language, it is that all the good environmental writers realize that they need to tap into the wisdom of locals. I mean, in Marginlands, for instance, you find somebody in Ladakh to talk about that landscape. You find people in Sundarbans to walk you through that landscape. You have Chatur Singh in the desert, and so on and on. Here, Macfarlane finds just the right person, the mycologist, Juliana Furchi, in Ecuador, Yuan, uh,
Yeah.
in Chennai, and he has that poet,
Yeah.
Rita Mestokosho. Is that how it's spelled? Yeah. Uh,
I am steering clear of pronouncing all those things for
yeah,
now
I know.
because I have not,
I'm
I've only heard it. I haven't seen it written. I need to go back and see how it's written to be able to pronounce it. So,
Yeah, but
yeah.
for the benefit of readers, I just wanted to walk it back and say, okay, this book basically starts with a conversation, or at least it's premised on a conversation that Macfarlane has with the son, where the son says, without any doubt or question, he says, "Yeah, rivers are alive." And then Macfarlane decides to dig deeper and to figure out, okay, if it's that obvious that rivers are alive, what does that mean? What are the implications when we grant, you know, life and personality and rights to a river? What does that mean in the larger context? And there's one question that sort of hangs over this whole thing, Arti, and I was wondering what you thought of it. Very clearly, Macfarlane is bullish on giving rivers and by extension various landscapes, grasslands, wetlands, whatever you want to call them, uh, life and agency. But he also cautions that this could lead to ventriloquizing rivers, giving a sort of human uh, framework to non-human entities. This is something I remember you've spoken about briefly, but when I was reading that, I left a note to myself saying I need to ask Aarti about this. How does that work?
I you're asking, I think I'm going to make a few enemies among my friends here.
Go for it.
But you're asking a cynic. I
Hmm.
do not subscribe somehow that that will ever work because even if it were to be that that I mean that's a huge risk we run, right, of ventriloquizing these landscapes, and then whose voice?
Hmm.
How are we sure that it's going to be a sane or what we think is sane, right? It could be any interloper's voice, and then what we do, right? If there are rights which I don't know, it's in a world where even human rights have literally no meaning.
Hmm.
How can we? Okay, so here's where I'm a cynic and a huge cynic. How can we ever imagine that something as, for me, as beautiful and alive and gorgeous and vital as a river, but to others, a conduit, a pipe of water, a resource, um, a weapon? Um, how are you going to, who's going to decide, and how are we going to decide? And I know it's worth fighting for, but um, in my lifetime, I'm sorry, I just unfortunately don't feel like I will live to see anything come of it. I would love it if it did, but I am so burned over the last few years with what I've seen of human rights being
Mhm.
crushed, and so willfully and so determinedly, um, and so regularly, so every day, that I can't see. It's just a few of us, I feel, speaking amongst ourselves. And I know there are a lot of people with a lot of hope that this can happen. And I would hate to, and I'll be with you, I'll stand beside you, shoulder to shoulder, as you fight for it. But it's not something I find it, I can't subscribe to it.
Hmm.
I would love for it to happen and I will fight for it. But look around us, just look around us.
And it's ironic, right? I mean, we're talking of rights, and the book that raises this question is also the book that tells us about how entire water bodies are being disappeared.
Yep.
They don't exist on a map. They don't exist in anybody's policy framework.
Look at the city we are living in, right?
Yeah, exactly. And okay, uh, that thing that you said just now, look at the city we're living in, kind of cues me to where we want to take this podcast next. But before I do that, I just wanted to ask, are there any other broad we do need to bring Rob Macfarlane onto this program once he is done with the post-release
Yes, that
rush
would be
and
lovely
all of that. Yeah.
for a wide-ranging discussion and just enjoying and celebrating rivers, nature.
And when he does come on board, I'm going to play this clip of how you react to the question of rivers' rights, just to see how he sees it and how he will sort of present the
You know,
optimist
I
view.
I vaguely remember standing over a tiny, beautiful pond in Cambridge when I think this topic came up, and I kind of scoffed. So maybe he has an idea, if he remembers, of what
Hmm.
uh, how I feel about it. But yes, I mean, yeah, I know that there's a wonderful movement towards it, and I'm all for the fight. But I
Yeah,
just don't have any hopes. Yeah. But we
right.
should definitely get not only Rob, but also Yuvan.
Yuan, absolutely. In fact,
Yes,
Yuan, probably even before Rob, because Rob, in any case, is going to be fairly busy, I'm guessing, for the next few
probably.
months
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
post book release. You know that very well. The weeks and months immediately after you release a
No,
book
and
are
he's
like
Rob
completely.
Macfarlane. Everybody
Yeah,
will want a piece of him. So, no.
absolutely.
So, but,
Yeah,
and Yuvan is no less. Yuvan is also busy and he's doing some amazing work. But let's see if we can maybe try and get him on a calendar. It'll be absolutely fantastic. Uh,
yeah. So, in any case, I mean, this book leaves us with this very powerful idea that rivers are living beings, whether we agree uh, that uh, this push for rights will work or not, the optimist, the pessimist, all of that. Uh, we also have places like Chennai, Yuvan, local activists fighting to bring rivers, water bodies back to life. Uh, and like we said, okay, Rob McFarlane for later, Yuvan hopefully sooner than that, as soon as we can find time with him. But uh, Arti, today's guest, S. Vishwanath, comes
yes.
kind of apropos, right? I mean, we know him as
Yes.
Zen Rainman, and he spent. You mentioned that thing about look at the place where we are living in right now, Bangalore. Bangalore has its problems, and we'll discuss those. But Vishwanath has been. I mean, he's dedicated his life to bringing water bodies back to life, reviving wells, reviving lakes, urban water systems, and you know him very well. I've interacted with him off and on. And one of the things that struck me is this underlying philosophy of his. He treats water as something that is alive, something that is sacred, which kind of plugs into what McFarlane's talking about as well, which you've talked about as well. All of that. So
Chatar Singh taught me to see it that way.
right. So
And guess who taught me, who pushed me to meet Chatar Singh? So yeah, let's get into that. It's wonderful to have Vishwanath on this podcast, Zen Rainman, and so let's cut to having him on.
right.
Great to have you with us, Zen Rainman, Vishwanath. Uh, I in my mind you are Zen Rainman, and then when I talk to you, I call you Vishwanath. But just a funny little. Uh, we've done a formal intro of you, but just a funny little uh, anecdote is that in 2013 January, I met Vishwanath at a cafe coffee day in Vittal Malya Road, and he gave me one phone number because I was talking to him. I said I want to start doing slow journalism on fresh water, and so this is the beginning of Marginlands. Okay, this is the seed of Marginlands that we're talking about, and I said I want to start delving deep into fresh water, and he said you need to go meet this man called Chatar Singh, and you gave me this one phone number. That's it, and Jaisalmer, of course. And that set the ball rolling. So you are literally the father of Marginlands.
For sure, I still remember the day, Arti, and I was thinking, what is this woman going to do at all with water? Because she's just talking about rivers, and I was wondering to myself, have I wasted 2 hours of my life in a coffee day chat with some person who I didn't have any clue about, who was talking all rivers and wanting to chase it down? So I'm glad that it turned out so well.
Thank you. You're very generous.
And the sequel to that is, I mean, I didn't realize that you guys had met and you gave Aarti the Chatar Singh number. She then comes to meet me at Yahoo and says, I need to go to Jaisalmer to follow up a story. What is the story? I don't know till I get there.
Hmm.
I was like, okay, now what am I supposed to do?
Hmm.
Can I go? I said, all right, go find out what it is. And yeah, strange how that happened. Because I think it was my introduction to Aarti's way of just not having a clue what the story is, going off somewhere and expecting.
Seat of the pants.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, it was way more than a story, right? The way
Yeah.
Chatar Singh introduced me to the desert, taught me about the desert, and taught me about how to think about water and life completely changed everything for me starting 2013.
He is truly the bard of the desert. And I think he was one of the key persons who influenced Anupam Mishra also. So it worked both ways. I think Anupamji learned a lot from Chatar Singh too, as much as Chatar Singh would have learned a bit from Anupam and his Talab Aaj Bhi Khare Hain.
Yes.
It sort of owes itself to those conversations with the people of the desert. So
That's right. Yeah. And I was thrilled. My only time that I met Anupam Mishra ji was at an India Rivers Week. I think it was 2019, just before COVID. And this was the year actually that he passed on, just a few weeks before he passed on. And when he met me, he said, I've been meaning to meet you, and you are one of the few people who gets the desert. And I was just so overcome when I heard that. And it was all thanks to Chatar Singh and the way he, he just takes you along, right? Doesn't speak much. So you're just following him, and he has an agenda. He teaches you how to read the desert. And it's just been fabulous. But thank you, Vishwanath, for setting that ball rolling. It has changed my life.
So in cricket, Arti, we have a Jam Sahib, which was the Maharaj Kumar of Ranji, right? And Chatar Singh is the Jam Sahib of
Jams.
the desert, right? So he's also Jam. So
Absolutely. It's so
connect.
funny because there was a carpenter who came to fix our front door the other day. And I asked him where he was from. And he said, Jaisalmer. I said, Jaisalmer proper? He said, nahi, ek chota sa gaon hai, Ramgarh. I said, Jaisalmer के पास? He said, हाँ. I said, आप जाम साहब को जानते हैं? Chattar Singh. He's like, हाँ, हम तो कितने सालों से जानते हैं and all that. So imagine, okay, here in Bangalore, there are those connections that come through.
It's a small world.
Really, really. Yeah. And it'll be remiss for me not to mention that today is also 13 years since Prem and I met for the first time.
Right. So may the fourth be with you, huh?
Exactly. Totally. The fourth is with us.
Yeah.
All right. Great. I'm going to toss this now to Prem.
Yeah. I mean, I remember at the start of this, Aarti was saying, we know you as Zen Rainman, but it's only when we meet that we use the word Vishwanath. I want to ask you about that. Where did the Zen Rainman come from? And a slightly larger question, how did your journey in water conservation begin, considering that, you started out working for the government?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
both serendipity, Prem. Sorry if I jump in or if
No.
welcome. So Zen Rainman is because all the Vishwanaths of the world, which is a common and garden moniker down this part of India, has been taken in terms of Gmail accounts, which is what one was trying to develop. So Vishwanath 1, 2, 2,000, 10,000 has been taken. So I had to figure a name out for the Gmail identity, and that's why the Zen Rainman came. At that particular point of time, of course, I was just watching the Dustin Hoffman flick Rainman, and Zen was something that one has been practicing or reading about a lot. So one put those two together, and that became Zen Rainman. And so coincidentally, with water and work, people start to associate the email handle with the person. And so Twitter, Facebook all gave me those handles, Zen Rainman, and I persisted with it. So that's about what it is. And the journey of water is also serendipity, though I've studied civil engineering and urban and regional planning. And in civil engineering, one has delved into hydrology. And we had a wonderful professor who actually got that subject clear to me, apart from passing exams, but to make me understand what it was all about. That remained at the back of my head. But then it's always been completely serendipity. I'm a twig or a log which floats on the river and allows the river to decide where I should land. And so water journey has been one of serendipity completely.
Hey, you mentioned this professor. Would you want to name him and the college?
Yes, Professor Srinivasmurthy, he's no more, but he was quite an eccentric gentleman, but brilliant at what he could communicate. And I think among the class of 51, which we were, I was the only person who got him. So, and in our university days, we had 9 questions out of which we had to pick 6 to answer in 3 hours. That was the typical semester paper. And hydrology is the one paper where I could answer all 9 and do that within 2.5 hours. And so that was the power of Professor Srinivasmurthy and his ability to teach and convey what he wanted to get across to students, I guess.
It's amazing, right? I mean, once in a while in our lives, we come across somebody like that. One professor, one teacher. One professor inculcated the love for English in me 1 year. George Matthews at Madras Christian College. I remember Arati talking about similar seminal influences. I wanted to just build on that for a bit. And back in '95, you started the Rainwater Club.
Yeah.
So the question I had was, I mean, that was probably one of the first platforms that we've had for sharing rainwater harvesting, knowledge about rainwater harvesting, all of that. How have you seen community involvement evolve in water conservation efforts since that time? And equally, what role does traditional knowledge, like that of the Manu Adar well diggers, play in modern solutions?
Well, that's very interesting because Prem, at least I'm from the generation which has seen 91 and pre-liberalization and post-liberalization. Most of my journey of education was pre-liberalization, and my work in the initial days with the Housing and Urban Development Corporation, where we were looking at funding settlements and housings all across rural and urban India, allowed me to travel to all these pockets and
Right.
where especially rural housing had come big thanks to MGR, NTR. The South was the hub of rural housing. We got a focus on rural housing here in the South, and HUDCO was the main lender for all these housing colonies. And so when one went to all these places, what one saw were unoccupied buildings. The buildings were there, Ashraya housing as we used to call it in Karnataka, but they were not occupied a lot of places. And the one reason why they were not occupied was water. Water was simply not available. And so therefore the question then was, how do states reach out to communities to provide water, and what do communities do to themselves to make sure that the provisioning happens? And that was the inquiry. And so post liberalization, one saw that the whole narrative changed. The state was no longer that keen on extending services, and others were coming into play, of which NGOs and communities were also at the forefront. Watershed has been one of India's pioneering initiatives, the entire watershed movement of soil and water conservation. Perhaps India has the largest extent of land covered under this watersheds, and extensively done by NGOs, civil society groups, and communities. So that was what triggered one's interest. And the Rainwater Club, as you were pointing out, was because the web was coming into being. And we were thinking that the web will unleash knowledge beyond physical meets and boundaries and books. And that this would be a place where language would not be a barrier, where distance would not be a barrier, and there could be real-time exchange of experiences and building theory and interest. So that's why we started Rainwater Club as a virtual entity. And the population of that, or the populating of that virtual entity at the website, would come from individuals and communities who would tell stories. And that's what one hoped for would be the form of discussion. And so during the journey, what one has figured out, as Arati met Chatar Singh, as I have met in my own life, Chatar Singh, of course, as the knowledge bearer of water and soil in Rajasthan, but also amazing individuals at all levels. And amongst those individuals were people from the well digging community whom I accidentally bumped into and sort of researched on what their work was all about and who they were all about. And one came across the kind of skill set that they had in terms of digging wells and the livelihood challenge that they were facing. And so, therefore, to create some kind of a platform by which their livelihood skills would be enhanced, at the same time, the city would look at water resilience. So water resilience, not as large-scale infrastructure, but water resilience coming from livelihoods. Could that be attempted? That was what we were doing with these communities and with peoples.
I need to toss this back to Arti. I've been monopolizing the conversation for a bit, but before I do that, one supplementary question I had: what is special about what the Manuvadar community brings to this whole thing of well digging?
So that's not to indulge in too much of social romanticism, but over time in India, the caste has consolidated over aspects of what trade or profession communities do, right?
Mhm.
And so the Manvadars were actually the people who dug the tanks all across South India. These are the people who dug the wells all across South India. They're an itinerant migrant community. They are the people who helped the British dig the Ganga Canal, the upper Yamuna Canal, all the
Wow.
canal systems which the British brought to India, making India the largest canal network nation on earth. A lot of it was because of the people who are essentially Manuvadars, right? So therefore, the knowledge they have with working on soil is something tremendous and spans decades and centuries, and there's a work there. Now, the question is, how relevant is the knowledge in present times, and how do we frame their livelihoods without the caste baggage, but with a livelihood and a profession baggage, which will help us move the needle on the ecological front. So that's the engagement with the Manvadars in their work.
How has it been? How has it been received, and where is at least Bangalore at when it comes to Manuvadars and them doing a lot of the well work and the realizing the vision that you guys have for.
So every day my WhatsApp is populated by at least 40 or 50 wells being dug or being cleaned or renewed. And these people, the people are exemplary businessmen, a lot of them, and they are taking their trade. I'm no longer in any way in control or any way in part of this whole decision making. The genie's out of the bottle in the sense. They would have dug in their estimate, which I collate with them, about 300,000 recharge wells, which
Wow.
makes this part of Bangalore and the surrounds of Bangalore the single largest density of recharge wells for any city or town in India, right? From an urban construct. So it's that they have done. What the Manvadars have also done is to demonstrate that the shallow aquifer is still a viable entity to be integrated as part of the water solutions. That then has become a 10-city project with the Ministry of Urban Housing and Urban Affairs, with the Amrut project, the Atal Mission for Revitalization of Urban Territories. Uh, Now it's rolling out in 75 cities across India, anchored by the National Institute for Urban Affairs. So it's now a Government of India program. And the Amrut guidelines demands that every city develop its own shallow aquifer management plan and its aquifer management plan. So from digging holes in the ground, now they have become suppliers of water or provisioners of water. Two, they have become part of the India movement to understand aquifers and their important role in cities' water supplies.
And are there other communities like the Manuvadars across India?
Yes, so they're known by different names. The Manvadars is a name that is typical to Karnataka, but they would be the Ode community in Gujarat or the Vaderas or ancillary names, but basically the same community or caste group which would be working on soil and water.
Yeah, I just to add, thanks to Vishwanath, I did dig an open well in my backyard in 2019, and a Manavadar young one, Venkatesh was just starting out at that time. He came and dug, and we struck water at about 28 feet
Yeah.
where I am, and the well is still it's still very much giving.
So so as you know, with Venkatesh, and he's now plying the trade. He has a business of his own. He's took it up from his father and is continuing the profession. Not all youngsters do that, but he's been one of those who do it. But what I think is the important message that they're bringing is the notion that it's only bore wells that are going to give us water has now been replaced with the idea that the shallow aquifer can both be replenished as you do so and used when the aquifer conditions are appropriate and give you water, which is a whole bunch more sustainable and dynamic.
Right. I'm wondering here if we can just do a small digression. I wanted to ask about what groundwater is. We are a groundwater economy.
Yeah.
India uses groundwater more than China and USA put together. I remember you saying, I remember Himanshu Thakkar saying this as well. It's a well-known thing that we are heavily calling in our debts, actually, so to speak, and then, using groundwater way more than maybe we should. But can you give us a sense of what is groundwater and how do we think about it?
Yeah, so an easy way to imagine it is to imagine a sponge below our feet. The sponge which is replenished by rain, which holds water and which can release it back to us if we put a straw into that sponge and then we draw it. So that's the basic shallow aquifer. But India is also hard rock terrain. Below that sponge are big chunks of rocks, you can imagine. And between those rocks are cracks and fissures because the rocks are not homogeneous. And in that, water gets stored, which is what you would call secondary porosity or cracks and crevices where groundwater is stored. This is where the bore wells go in. So in a simple logic, the dug wells or open wells go to the shallow aquifer, the bore wells go into the deep aquifer, which is rocks and cracks. Now, the only limiting factor for the groundwater to be replenished is rain. How much does it rain in a particular area and how much water can be collected on the surface for it to slowly percolate into the ground and fill it up. The holding capacity of these aquifers is large in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, something like 300x of where X is rainfall, a bit limited in the hard rock terrain, which could be 4 to 5x, where X is rainfall. So if 900 millimeters of rain occurs, then the capacity of the aquifer to hold water is about 4,500 millimeters of water, rainwater, right? So now the challenge is how do we replenish the aquifers as much as possible with the rain, but to limit our demand or our extraction to that refilling process only. And ideally, it should be done on an annual cycle. So if we get a good year of rainfall this year and we put in a lot of water into it, we should only draw a portion of this water. But if it's a bad year of rainfall, then we should further limit our draw if we are going to use it as an annual replenished aquifer, right? But it could also be imagined as a stock that we use only in case of emergency. So we use surface water when there's no surface water available because of drought, then we tap into groundwater. Unfortunately, in India, we're using it as a recurring deposit, as a savings bank account, not a fixed deposit.
Can I ask one? It's just a newbie question. So you said that there's the sponge and then there are the cracks and crevices. Does the sponge connect to the cracks and crevices?
In some places it does, or in some places it doesn't. So in theoretical terms, it's called vertical connectivity. So where the sponge actually connects to the cracks and crevices, then you will find that if you drill a bore well, the open well will go dry close by. But in some other places, when you drill a bore well, the open well will still have water because the sponge is not connected to the crack.
Got it. Fantastic. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Prem?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to shift from basic hydrology a little bit, and it's something that I've heard you speak about, and I've always been curious about how you view this. You said that water solutions, and God knows we need water solutions. You said that water solutions are often about politics, about culture, about management, and not just about technology, right? Uh, could you possibly explain that maybe with an example, like the story about sludge management, for instance? Question being how social dynamics shape sustainable outcomes.
Yeah. So water is often perceived as a physical good, it's H2O there, or as an ecological or environmental good where it's there and it's allowing biodiversity to proliferate. But fundamentally, water is a social good in the human construct, right? So as you wanted as an example, we work a lot with lake rejuvenation or tank rejuvenation in this part of South India, especially in the district of Kolar, which is drought prone, in Taluk of Mulbagal, with a small women-led group called Arohana. Now, Asha, who leads Arohana, has desilted, let's say, the tank of Pichguntlahalli, a village tank, which is a large tank with a 60-acre command area where rice paddy is cultivated traditionally with the waters of the tank. Now, once the catchment of the tank, the feeder channels, and the distribution channels all are desilted and brought into proper shape, the tank receives rainfall and is full. Who benefits from the waters of the tank is a question that I have started to ask myself as a civil engineer. Now, the first people who benefit from the waters of the tank are those who own land in the command area. If
Right.
you don't own land in the command area, that water has no meaning for you. It may add up a little bit for your drinking water requirement, but not directly because the government is giving you drinking water there. So what water does as a social good in a tank is actually allows the rich to get richer and increases social inequity, because now the rich farmer can grow 2 or 3 crops because of work done on the commons, which the tank is privatized good, which water has become through its access in the by land, has allowed the rich farmer to cultivate 3 crops. Rich is a relative term that I use, but relatively rich in that village context. And what could happen to the marginal landowners who have bad quality land, not in the command area, but who don't have access to the water, or those who are landless, is that they could be left behind. What could also happen in Pitchkuntlalli is, now that the paddy is cultivated in this whole chunk, they use machines such as threshers to thresh the rice paddy and to get the grains. And even the job opportunities which were there for those who were non-landless, that too is gone. So if water is not dealt with as a social good, and if equity, access, and justice is not at the fundamental framework or at the root of interventions, merely taking photographs on Instagram and Facebook and posting it with a full water body actually does not reveal the picture of distress it could cause.
Hmm.
So that's the example that I can give you, Prem, that water is a social good and access to water is more important than the water itself. So, yeah.
No, to connect it back to the question about politics, this thinking that you just outlined, does this even form part of policymakers and the way they look at?
So
Uh,
unfortunately, we haven't created institutions of water governance which has a social bearing, right? So water management is essentially a technical or a civil engineer or a hydrogeologist job. So therefore, we undercook this importance of getting water to all. Some water for all, not all water for some. That's the
hmm,
philosophy. And so therefore, when you look at the narrative that's built in Bangalore, it's always posited as a resource scarcity, but it's a distribution and access scarcity.
right.
Actually, let's actually jump into Bangalore, right? Um, So, Vishwanath, you have been strongly advocating, and you've told me tons of times that Bangalore, for example, in terms of rain itself, it receives way more than it even uses per day in a year or whatever. Um, and still, we run out of water, and there's these screaming headlines of which some of them are kind of off center as well, of water scarcity, 0 day, 0 hour, this, that, and the other. Yes, exactly. So, if you were to look at Bangalore, and given the fact that we do not have perennial rivers, we used to have the system of lakes, which have now, for various reasons, fallen by the wayside, been converted, etc. Where where do you see solutions for us? And I know that you've always said that there are solutions, it's not hopeless, and there's so much we can do, and in some ways we are beginning to do it. So if you could just elaborate a little bit on where Bangalore sits to start with, and then what you think is a viable way forward for Bangalore, given for water security.
Yeah. So one of the things that I now realize that Bangalore is a city of the Kaveri. The Kaveri is used more by citizens of Bangalore than anybody in the entire basin. 14.5 million people in Bangalore pay homage to the Kaveri every day when they open their tap and get water flowing through them, right? So therefore, the first onus of Bangalore as responsibility should be to the Kaveri River, and it should work towards protecting the old growth forests, the Western Ghats, so that the river flows in quantity and quality, right? So it's not now, currently, it's only an extractive river for the city, right? So therefore, the city in a river basin is one very important thing that we should focus on. And the city should develop this linkage with the river Kaveri. It doesn't have any institutional mechanism by which it reacts with the river Kaveri, except putting dams and drawing water, right? So, but in terms of making sure that it flows reliably, we need to work on that. The second aspect is the local water body, which are the tanks and lakes. These have been critical water sources for the city for a long time. However, we have lapsed into environmental nostalgia of an imagined glorious past. Now, 1876, 1877, 1878, 3 years of consecutive drought and famine in Old Mysore. 90,000 people die in Bangalore city. Die. These are not Bangalore citizens, but these are citizens who come from Ballari and other Kolar and other places for food in the city, which is being provided by the state and by generous people, but they die here. 1/4 of the population of Mysore kingdom is eliminated in this drought and famine. 12.5 lakh people die out of the 50 lakh population that Mysore kingdom had. Mysore then decides to build the railways because food needs to be transported if it's short in one particular area, and therefore it starts the Bangalore-Mysore railway line. But it also starts the pipe water supply from Hesarghatta. So it starts with the Sankey Tank Reservoir and it starts 1894 Hesarghatta because it realizes that the tanks of Bangalore, the glorious 1,000 tanks of Bangalore, are not sufficient to supply a population of 1.5 lakh people with even less than 50 liters per capita per day in consecutive years of drought. So consecutive years of drought can only be tackled by a large river, which is more perennial, which is more immune from droughts. So therefore, we move to Arkavati and then we move to the Kaveri, right? Now, what should be the role of tanks? Now, in the modern movement, we now understand that the tanks are not the old design of the tanks which was meant for paddy cultivation, but these tanks now are essentially biodiversity spots, but also recipients of treated wastewater during the time of scarcity of rainfall. So if these tanks are designed for biodiversity, for cultural aspect, but also to receive treated wastewater and recharge the aquifer, they can be full 365 days a year and keep our groundwater afloat. So we need new imaginations to interpret old artifacts, position them, but still preserve the value of heritage culture, social justice, and bring that to play. So the taps that are available to the city of Bangalore is the pipe water supply, which comes from the Kaveri. Rainfall, as you were pointing out, 3,000 million liters per day equivalent, more than what comes from the Kaveri, which needs to be put to productive use. Surface water bodies, which are our lakes, tanks, which need to be protected and preserved and enhanced. Groundwater, which is shallow aquifer and deep groundwater, that's the fourth tap. The fifth tap is used water or treated wastewater, which should then fill all these spaces and become a source of water. If you add up all the 5 taps and then put in the 6th tap, which is demand management, and demand management, there should be a cap on usage, there should be responsible usage. There should also be a price for the usage so that the money goes back to be reinvested in the ecological regeneration of water itself. If we do this 6, there's enough and more water for our city. There's enough and more, as I argue sometimes, to the horror of everybody concerned who's an old Bangalorean, that this city can support a population of 50 million. It's at 14.5 million. So there is no water scarcity. There's only a imagination scarcity, investment scarcity, and a goal scarcity. If we design around these 6 tabs, I think there's abundance, not scarcity, with the goal that it should be universal access, that every household should have a right to a connection to certain amount of free water and a connection for sanitation and sewage, so that all the used water is taken away. The primary goal being universal connection, access to all, and the secondary goal being how the ecological regeneration can happen so that there's water for everybody, where pricing also plays a major role, which is something which NGOs and others find difficult to grapple with, the price of water.
I'm going to channel Chatar Singh once more because he has famously said, before a drought and rainfall comes a drought of ideas.
Yes.
So, and I think you said to the same, you speak to the same thing. I just got a message that my internet is unstable. Did I disappear or am I still here?
No,
You're
you're
still
there.
there.
Okay, great. All right, good. So I just wanted to, one thing I remember when we were talking in 2015, Vishwanath, you were talking about the Kaveri being sucked from both ends.
Yeah.
From the groundwater, which is now fueling Kaveri instead of the other way around, and also, of course, surface water, we taking the sucking from the Kaveri. So would you be able to just speak a little bit to that and where we are at that point right now? I know Kaveri is a highly extracted river, and where are we with this?
So we're actually in a terrible situation because we still not created a river basin institution, especially for the main tributaries of the Kaveri. Let's pick the Shimsha or Lakshman Tirtha, for example. Now, each one of these tributaries has a separate characteristic of its own, right? The Lakshman Tirtha is different from the Shimsha. And if we have an institution actually looking at what's happening to the land use of this tributary, what is happening to the regenerative zones, the recharge zones, the flow zones. And we make sure that we protect these zones to the extent possible. We protect it from sand mining, for example. We protect it from industrial pollution. Then there's a chance for the river. We don't, the absence of a river basin institution, and even at a state level, is a bad sign. We need institution building along those lines. The river itself, we talk about a river Kaveri Arati. That's what I read in the papers today. These
Yes.
symbolic gestures are the dominant form of our interaction with the river, not the deeper functional interactions that are called for. The other solution, for example, for the scarcity of water in Bangalore is the Mekedatu Reservoir, which is going to around 5,000 hectares of the Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary. So now, if we start to run a narrative of Bangalore running out of water, the solution by the state is the dam on the river Kaveri itself. So
Correct.
unless we define the problem correctly, the solution will be worse than the problem. And the solution, the impact of this solutioning, of this kind of solutioning, will be completely detrimental to the river itself. So the river carries the burden of human use, but also narratives. So how do we manage this is the big question that we have. If we don't build the right narrative around the river and then create the right institutions to govern it, I'm afraid that we are in for a bleak future.
Are there any states in India that are doing this? Does any state have a river basin management system?
There are mandated, say, for example, the Ganga now has the National Mission for Clean Ganga, and so therefore it's got a river basin plan, and there's work happening on it. And there is the talk that it will now flow down to the rivers here. But that's not exactly what kind of an institution we need. We need a complex institution which is democratic, but also competent in terms of the knowledge base that is needed by the people within that institution to do that. I don't think we've been able to get anywhere close to building a good river basin institution anywhere in India.
So,
Prem?
yeah, as trying to think of all this is kind of a 30-minute primer on how water works and its role in our life and how we manage it and all of that. I had a tangential question. See, you are an expert in this, and there are others, pitifully few, but there are some. I was thinking, you've posted just on Twitter alone, forget about your Instagram and all the other social media platforms. You posted over 88,000 tweets. There are YouTube videos. There are groups like Open Wells of India. Uh, there's this very strong, very focused online presence that you've built. And you were talking earlier about 1995 opening up that vista for you and you realizing what was possible, right? And you've actually made it happen. So the question I had is, and this is a question that I have for anyone who uses digital platforms for advocacy. I want to as well. I'm not sure about the efficacy. So my question is, how has digital advocacy helped you spread awareness about water and environmental issues? Does it work? Do you see a difference in people's understanding based on the work that you do on these digital platforms? And related, what are the gaps that still exist in terms of environmental education as far as India is concerned?
Yeah, so these are interesting questions as to what is your kind of presence on these social media platforms. You could be, for example, a journalist who's delving into various aspects of the environment and projecting the case for that particular part of the environment, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you are the messenger in the sense that you're picking up stories from the ground and relating it to the lay public for information, knowledge building, and capacity building. Or
Right.
you could be like me, who's somebody who's a professional in that particular sector, who then uses the medium of communication to get across the message for that sector alone, and perhaps chunks of the sector in such a fashion that it interests more people than
Mhm.
you would otherwise in your professional circles. How would you reach out to more informed and knowledgeable people? So that's what social media does. But the other thing that it does is it gives you a brand value, the influencer role, what is now called the influencer role. But you could actually position yourself as a knowledge influencer with competencies and capacities in a particular sector if you so choose to, right? And that what it does is it opens up many doors to you. So now I
Mhm.
sit on several government platforms in the decision-making platforms, say, for example, the technical committee of the Bangalore Water Supply Sewerage Board or of the Jal Jeevan Mission, I think a lot because of my social media presence. People know me from there, and they know that I don't have a particular product that I'm selling. I'm selling a generic idea and the notion of sustainability. So that's important to cultivate, and then it gives you position. So it's very important to be in social media. It's very important to be truthful in the messaging you do, and to do the fact checking to make sure that it's not just an opinion, but it's something which comes with some amount of work on the ground, research, and knowledge that it is genuine to the extent possible.
Arati?
Um, I guess it's a question that I get asked a lot, and I'm going to throw it back to you. What is it that people like us can do? Even if it is in terms of furthering the understanding, but then awareness, understanding, and all of that. I think at this point we need more than that, or we need something that's more actionable than all of that. What is it that we can?
It's a difficult thing to advise, Abdi, but what happens is we are now in an era of highlighting problems, right? And the solutions which come from certain channels is I make 50 lakh rupees cultivating mushrooms or some gobbledygook like that. The solutioning also is so superficial that it's amazing that even that one believes that that can actually work, right? I won't name the sites and the platform. So I think there's a space for problem identification, but also genuine seeking of solutions with all the problems that it has. Those kind of stories need to be told.
Hmm.
I'll just give you an example, a very quick example. Bangalore is the second largest producer of treated wastewater to fill lakes in a hinterland for agriculture purpose, next only to Mexico City. Mexico City does about 4,000 million liters per day of treated wastewater, which goes for agricultural use. In Bangalore, eventually 1,200 million liters per day will go out from the city to fill 1,000 lakes in Kolar, Chikballapur. Actually, drought proofing the entire hinterland if done well, right? If the treatment quality is good, if the lakes are protected, if there's no secondary pollution there, and if it's monitored continuously to make sure that that water gives access to those who need it the most. Now, I haven't read a single story on this particular element of what a city could become. And what I call the city is, as you know, a water and fertilizer factory if it so chooses. It's not a net consumer of water, it's a net generator of water. And it can support the food economy of agriculturists and its own self-reliance through the use of treated used water, right? But there are problems. There are problems in the treatment. There are problems in the secondary contamination, which has been highlighted by the press a lot of times. Oh, you're sending in raw sewage into the towns and cities. But how do we then craft a story which looks at problems but also looks at solutioning? Those kind of narratives have to be hammered through.
Yes, I remember we took a trip once. If you remember,
Yes.
we went all the way down past the we followed the Vrishbhavati and up to the
Correct.
Sangam and back,
Correct.
and we saw how
Farmers
black it runs.
were growing mulberry and rice paddy, as you saw that, but that was untreated
Untreated,
wastewater.
yes.
And now there's treated wastewater that's happening there, which is going to fill 400 lakes, which is happening right now, right? So I think some stories need a deeper dive as you folks do the slow storytelling and the storytelling of transformation. And the challenges of that transformation. Like I said, the transformation could be partial, it could be incomplete, it could not be socially just. If we focus on those elements, then it catches the attention of decision makers, and therefore the better goals and objectives are set. Otherwise, right now, storytelling is resulting in knee-jerk reactions amongst policymakers and politicians and bureaucrats. And that knee-jerk reaction is suboptimal. The classic example is this: Bangalore has run out of water. The Niti Aayog report, which said that by 2020, groundwater in Bangalore would have run out completely. Niti Aayog says that 2020 groundwater's run out. But I go to many places where wells have water at 6 feet. So, but if in the decision-making circles, the Niti Aayog report, and let's say that I won't name another institution which painted the whole of India red and said this is climate change completely affected, and deep red. And say, oh, 52 degrees or 54 degrees kind of called wrong. Now, if you build that wrong narrative, the solutions that we seek will all be wrong.
Where does climate? Sorry, I'm hogging the thing now, but
No,
I
no,
wanted to just ask this
go
one
ahead.
question: Where does climate change fit into all of this, and what are we seeing? And
So climate change layers itself on imperfect services. And so one of the things that one needs to do is to sift the impact of climate change from bad management of a problem itself, right? So it's easy to blame climate change and say, oh, we can't do anything because of climate change. Yeah. So that's an easy path for many of the decision makers to take. Also, for the climate change purveyors uh, who are there, who are environmentalists, to say that the solutions that they talk about increasingly is nature-based solutions, stuff like that. But nature-based solutions work when the brown and gray infrastructure isn't fully in place. When you've got all the pipes to everybody's house, then you can put in the wetlands and you can put in the water bodies and the groundwater and aquifers. But if you don't have pipes into houses, the wetland remediation will not get water to your house.
mm,
Mhm.
And so unfortunately, in India, we have to do a good balance between circular economy, water sensitive urban design, nature based solutions with the hard engineering of getting pipes and water to people. We seem to swing the pendulum in one direction, especially with the climate change narrative.
very true. I mean, that's a soapbox that we often sit on ourselves, and actually, it's what Marginlands is kind of based on as well. That I think there's very few mentions of climate change in that. It's all about on ground inequities and in terms of just mismanagement and wrong identification of problems. Yeah. Yeah. Prem?
Yeah, while you and Vishwanath have been talking, I've been making notes to myself, and I just realized one of the notes I made is ping Vishwanath, pick his brains for storylines that are missing from the public discourse, and then get those stories done. I think that's one of the,
I made
yeah,
that note here. Hmm.
yeah, right. And I have a physical version of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's something we need to do ASAP. So, parking that thought, boss, I wanted to ask you this. You, throughout this conversation, you have identified problems. You've also shown how those problems can be resolved, what it takes first in the thinking part. And one of the points that you keep making repeatedly, not just on this podcast, but even elsewhere, is the classic line, right? To solve a problem, you first have to identify the problem properly or to define the problem properly. Uh, Based on all of this, and based on what you were talking about earlier about how Bangalore uh, should be water sufficient if things are done right. I was wondering, could you give us a vision for what the ideal city would be? How it would handle this?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are, for me, six lenses of sustainability. And so these
Mhm.
numbers come as a civil engineer. You have to pardon that, 5 tabs, six lenses.
Yeah, yeah.
So first is the social lens of sustainability, in which you have to aim at universal access, as I said, equity, justice, and access. That's the first lens of sustainability. Unless there is
Mhm.
equity, access, and justice, what are we going to sustain? The second is the technical lens. We have to choose the appropriate technology relevant for us as an economy. As an example, decentralized sewage treatment plants, decentralized water management systems. So the second lens is technological. The third, very important, is institution. We now have 20th century institutions governing 21st century problems. We need
Ah.
to reimagine and recreate our institutions to be able to understand and define the problem correctly, and then have the wherewithal to be able to tackle it correctly. Just another example, if you don't have an hydrogeologist in a water supply institution, groundwater does not exist for you,
Hmm.
right? So unless the institution is equipped to have that vision, it will not see it, the resource or the management plan for itself. The fourth lens is financial, and this is a very tough one, especially with water, because water is a human right, but water is also an economic good. Where does it transcend from becoming a human right to an economic good is something that we'll have to define in the particular context of society itself. Yeah, we haven't done that. We grossly underprice water, therefore we undervalue it, therefore it results in pollution. My argument is, if you pay the true price for water, there should be no pollution on the ground. Because the true
Hmm.
price for water is when you release it back to nature at the same quantity and quality at which you appropriated it in an urban setting, right? Where water is used, not consumptively, it comes back in the shape of used water. So the fourth lens is financial, and we need to work on it. The fifth lens is legal. We are undercooked in terms of the laws that are needed to govern the commons. We have laws to govern the state, we have laws to govern the private, but the laws of the commons and treating water as the commons and protecting the commons, we're hugely undercooked. Again, as an example, groundwater does not have enough laws for us to manage it as a commons. It's under the Easements Act where it becomes a private property. The sixth lens, final lens, is ecological or environmental. When we satisfy the first five lenses, the sixth, ecological, for biodiversity's sake, for the sake of the environment itself, not for environment as a service provider to us humans, but environment for its own sake, is something that we need to architect ourselves through the governance mechanisms and get it done. If we get these six done, and of which institution building is the most crucial, we have the solutions.
Is there any city in the world that does this well, or at least checks some of the boxes more than others?
It comes as examples from the developed world. For example, Singapore would do it pretty well, or if you pick Helsinki, or if you pick Stockholm, Amsterdam, they do that reasonably well. New York does it very well with the Catskill Mountains and how it gets its water to itself, right, and through tunnels. So from the developed world, we have a lot of examples. From a developing world context, we'll have to pick examples, and some examples come like Phnom Penh in Cambodia. Which does a pretty good job, decent job of it. Manila addresses it a bit better than most others. So, but for us in India, we have a legacy of a particular form of social consumption of water and a particular form of governance and institution building. We'll have to find our answers ourselves.
Of course. And I as soon as I asked that question, I was like, oh my God, anyone listening to this is going to put junket trips to these places and then bring back solutions from there to be implemented here. And what have I done?
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. I think, yes, these things are hyper local, and the geographies are different in so many ways that.
And also, sometimes we beat ourselves up too much. We have the right solutions. We don't learn from our own solutions and expand it and replicate it and scale it up. Yeah. So I think that inner confidence amongst ourselves to say, hey, this is something that is good, which can be worked upon, also needs bolstering. From an institutional perspective, all institutions get bashed for the lack of ability to deliver service, for rent seeking, for corruption at all. And so they've become defensive in all senses. Now, to get some genuine praise and build morale and to build solutions from within institutions is going to be a very tough ask for us, which needs to be done. It's not being done.
Do we have any champions for this kind of thinking other than
very less? Very less. So our civil society groups are also on technical problem identification and technical solutions, or social championing of causes, right? So fragmented. There are now groups which are emerging, which are doing a much broader thinking, but it has to be developed a lot more, both on the academic reporting journaling front as well on the civil society front.
Gosh, we have our work cut out for us.
Yeah, we do.
No, but there are very interesting solutions. So I don't want to end on a morose note. Let's pick the town of Devanhalli, right? Where the international airport is located, 45,000 population. What Devanhalli Town Municipal Council did with a whole bunch of partners, CSR partners and NGOs, was to clean up its local lake called Sihinir Kere, link it to its catchment so that all the water in Devanhalli comes to the Sihinir Kere. The well diggers helped revive the well next to it, an old 100-year-old well, a huge dug well. Now the water came to the lake, it infiltrated through the ground, came to the well. We checked the water quality from Biome Trust and with the help of the local municipality, all of it owned by the municipality. Set up a water treatment plant and we're able to supply Devanhalli town with 640,000 liters of water a day. It will become 1 million liters of water per day through this lake well rejuvenation. The lake also received treated wastewater from Bangalore, right? Diluted treated wastewater from Bangalore and can get filled if there is bad year of rainfall. So treated used water now becomes domestic water for the town. All this happens because the well has come back to life with very less energy. So it costs 1 rupee 54 paisa to generate 1,000 liters of potable water for Devanhalli town. So water becomes cheap if you revive the local, right? Carbon emissions become less because groundwater table, as much as it comes up, you require less energy. Otherwise, they were going to 1,200 feet deep borewells to draw water. So there's a 1/20th reduction in energy consumption and carbon emission. So what you can do is to be transformative with local, be climate resilient as well as climate mitigating if you take the right approach. And you can do it at scale with town municipal councils coming into play with the traditional well digging community. inaction. The mudwarders also being part of the solution, the fishermen being part of the solution, and cutting edge boson white water with its all high tech water treatment plants also part of the solution. So marry the 15th century with the 21st century and get your solutions. These are possible. And so one is always excited by the ability for us to replicate it if we want to, because it's low cost.
See, boss,
Fabulous.
this is what I was hoping for, that concrete example of all these theories actually coming together, making a difference, right? On that same note, and I unless Arti has another
I
question to
just
you.
want to just point out something where
Mhm.
when Vishwanath was speaking, he talked about a lake called Sihinir Kere. And in Kannada, it translates in English to sweet water lake, which I just thought was just fantastic. And we are big, huge language buffs here. So it's just
Arti, it
lovely.
also has great meaning because all other water there is khara. It's brackish water. The wells
Ooh,
are all brackish except near the lake where you get sweet water. And that was the source
Wow.
of the water for the fort, 1504, where people from the fort would go to the lake to get water for it themselves, right? And
Wow.
this is the place where Tipu Sultan was born.
fabulous. Wow. No, I'm
So,
done. I'm done. I'm going to sit with this. This is going to be in my
Yeah,
head now. It's so
I know.
nice.
so actually, when you go there, you see history, heritage, and modernity all coming together at one place, seeking solutions on the waterfront, right? And how do we then solve the problem of Devnalli Fort, as well as private apartments which are coming, which are selling for 2 crores, 2.5 crores. Now, this is India in full glory and display with solutioning also.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Yes. I think I'm definitely going to meet Zen Rainman at yet another coffee
Yeah.
shop, and we're going to take this up for sure.
So most
Yeah.
welcome to come to Devnalli and take a look around.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And you're not going alone either.
Yep. If we can make a nice trip out of it.
Yeah. So, boss, I mean, at some point we're going to have to get you back, because all that you've been saying today is just spark more and more thoughts and more things. But rather than ask stupid questions, we'd rather process all of this and then get back to you. But on the way out, I wanted to ask you if you could, for the listeners, provide a kind of a call to action. For instance, listeners who are inspired by your work, what is that one practical action they can take within their own communities to contribute, whether it is to water conservation, climate resilience, and supplementary question, how do they stay engaged with your initiatives?
Yeah, so the engagement with the initiatives is easy. Go to biometrust.org website. It provides you a lot of information, or follow the handle of Zen Rainman. I put out a whole bunch of information there. What do we do as individuals is, the first thing is to be mindful about water. Develop this attitude of mindfulness, and then you react appropriately. So if you find a leak in your house, or if your tap is overflowing, you fix it. If your overhead tank is overflowing, fix the leaks. As individuals, one of the nicer things that you can do for water is to choose an eco-friendly detergent. Sometimes we don't see that as a major important role, but a phosphate-enriched detergent ends up in a sewage treatment plants, lakes, rivers, and does more destruction than anything else that you will be able to save as water. You'll have destroyed millions of liters of water, whereas you would have saved a few hundred liters if you do mindful action. So choose what you use in your house mindfully when it comes to it being released into the environment and what damage it does. The next thing to do is as a community is try and work with the local government school to understand what its challenges with water is and whether you can solve it out, or try and engage with a lake which is closest to you to see what can be done to protect the water body with fellow citizens, right? The last thing that one can do, both as citizen and community, is to hold the state accountable for all the bad it does, but also to pat it for the good that it does. Remember, rights comes with responsibilities. Ask yourself what the true price for water is and whether you'd be willing to pay it.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is just, like Prem said, it has sparked so many questions and so many possible avenues for work in the future as well. And I think a few field trips, maybe even with you, it's just going to be hugely enlightening, even for our listeners and viewers. And maybe we can even do something like that where we report from the field at a future time with you. Thank you so, so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks,
And may the
boss.
fourth be
This has
with you
been
again.
Yes.
no, this has been seriously brilliant. It's kind of eye opening. So thank you very much for that, for taking the time, and for also the interactions that we will have in the future.
Yes, indeed.
My pleasure. Thank you.
As always, right? Spend even 10 minutes with Vishwanath, and he opens up your mind to so many possibilities. In this case, not just possibilities about how we can live with our environment, but also from the point of view of you and me, Arti, the number of story ideas that he just casually tossed off, and I was frantically trying to scribble notes while he was talking. Uh, we need to give that a listen again and sort of calendar some of these things and actually go and do this. But
Yes.
also interestingly, the way he codified those, that call to action, 5 discrete points,
Yes.
you do this, then you do this, then you do this. It's a
Yes.
masterclass in living with your land, living with your environment, leaving it just that little bit better.
Yeah. And
So
innately understanding it. He has such a good grip on what the city does to the river and what the river should do to the city. You
yeah,
know, going back to, oh my God, this just came to me. Going back to Rob's book, which is how we began this, well, we didn't begin this episode, but which is also in this episode, there is a quote by Yuvan in it, which says that they had to kill a river for the city to live.
yeah,
Right, and we're that close to doing that to the Kaveri by severe over extraction and things like that. And again, listening to Zen Rainman, to Vishwanath, it needn't be that way, right?
correct. Yeah, those examples that he showed, right? I mean, he discussed, right, the one about Kolar and
Hmm.
that region, also the airport region, which those are two things that I had jotted down at the time, saying, okay, need to go to the ground and see how this plays out, and take Vishwanath with us so he can
Yes,
actually
that.
talk us through
Oh,
it.
traveling with Vishwanath, you see it completely differently. I have
Yeah.
traveled with him to the Sangam of
Hmm.
Arkavati and Vishbhavati, Arkavati and Kaveri,
Hmm.
and it's another um, it's another it's a completely different point of view that you get. You see it so differently.
So, right, near future, that's one of the things we do. Meanwhile, yeah, any last thoughts, Arti?
Well, it'll be great to hear back from all of you. We've talked about a bunch of things on this episode. Vishwanath has spoken about so much. Write into us, please, marginlands@gmail.com. You can also DM us on various. You probably follow Prem on X, me on Instagram. If you don't, please do. We're also at From the Marginlands on Instagram. So feel free to reach out to us on any one of these through any one of these platforms, and write into us about what you thought about this episode, about my cynicism, about anything, and and um, and also Prem.
Yeah, hit the subscribe button if you like what we're doing. It really helps. Also, hit that bell icon so that you can be notified of future episodes. Thank you all for listening, and Alvina.
Yes, and also, we'd love to hear from you about your experiences. Along rivers, along in cities, by wetlands, by any landscape that you have experienced. It would be lovely to hear from you. So please do write into us, and stay tuned. We will be back with yet another episode in 2 weeks' time. Take care.
Bye bye.